curious.
Well, I've captured another States member, a newbie, who had his first scrutiny examination yesterday. How was it?
Interesting, and I was kind of, am I relieved? I don't know that I'm relieved about how it went. I think I was pleased that we were able to cover all the topics that we were asked on and reasonably well, which is encouraging because it kind of makes me feel like I'm getting my head around the topic, which is massive, in a better way. I'm becoming more automatic with some of the standard questions. So I think, was it a good scrutiny? I suppose so, but I don't know. Maybe I'll tell you in 2 or 3 scrutinies' time whether the first one was the best one or not. I don't know. We'll see.
It was good. It says I failed to introduce you as
David Warr, yes,
Minister of
Housing and Communities.
Because that's one of the very questions I want to say.
Yeah.
Communities didn't feature a lot, did they?
No, they didn't. And I think what I always see as communities is what we call placemaking. So I think this is where we briefly touched on this, what we call future places of St Helier, this group overlooking how St Helier should develop, because at the moment we're very conscious that in the north of town, for instance, there's a massive amount of housing going on, being built. Is that creating a community, or do we need to do more? What about the park? What about the school? All of these things which have to come into play when you're building a community.
Because as you know, I interviewed Deputy Warr yesterday because he was on the panel interrogating you.
Yeah, he's very gentle, I have to say. I'm sure he'll like me for saying that.
Well, I mean, it was. I thought it for a first attempt for you. It was a first attempt. Everybody has a role, don't they? And they want to look good to the public. But I thought you did very well. I mean, you didn't refuse to answer it. You didn't give evasive. If you didn't know, you said you didn't know. But today there was a lot of waffle going on, and it was a rather broad.
Right.
And the question I asked was the burning question for me, and I sat there. Well, they're bound to mention the non-quals eventually, but they never did. No. And I thought that was very amiss of them. It wasn't your fault. If you weren't asked the question, you weren't required to say. You could have said, but. What is going to happen to them? I mean, you're the minister. What is going to happen?
That's a really good question. I mean, Rob, I think in his interview with you, made this point as if he could tomorrow scrap the non-qual ruling and he could just provide open market rental to anybody out, anybody who comes on this island, he would do that tomorrow. And I think that's I wish I could sit here and not talk as a minister and just talk as a man on the street, because I know it'll all turn into. But in honesty, if I was really, really honest, I would say I would agree with him entirely on that point, because I think it's highlighted to me they are the most stressed people financially. They are the least well paid. They are living in the worst conditions, so overcrowding. So all that stuff which I've talked about on homelessness, overcrowding and all of these scenarios absolutely applies to that category of individual, and it's really, really frustrating. But I also get, and the other side of this argument, which is the fear factor, in which everybody goes, population growth. It's all these people. You'll just fill the place up with immigrants because everybody wants to live here. And I kind of get a bit of that when that was the case. But I think there are ways and means to subtly control it, but housing is such a blunt tool in all of this. It really, really is. And if you turn around and go on the assumption that it's a human right to have a roof over your head, and if you start from that premise and to live in a sensible way, I think then some of this stuff falls away. One
of the few judgments that Bailiff Krill made years ago was the BBC housing case. And he said, John, he found in favour of the BBC because they weren't allowed to rent or buy a property for the manager of the business, the broadcaster. The housing law is a law to house people. However tempting, it must not be used or attempt to be used to control immigration.
Right.
Now that judgment has been consistently ignored.
Yeah.
Now they've gradually changed the law over the years, and they've made the process more of an immigration control law.
Yeah.
But today, I went to the scrutiny today, and of course, the same major subject was, same as your meeting, lack of data.
Yeah.
Now, they've got lack of data, and the Morel was answering it. I mean, it's not his fault, he's fresh to that job, but he has been in the States before. He could have asked for data long ago, he's been there long enough. There was lack of data. Virtually every question, we haven't done that, we must do that, we must have a look at that, we must have a... And you wonder, I mean, this is not to do with your scrutiny panel, and I was sitting there thinking, well, this island prides itself on being such a successful place. Why bother with the data? You've obviously, if you're so successful, you don't need the data. So what are you going to do with it? You're just going to ignore it like you always do.
Certainly I wouldn't ignore it, that's for sure. And having said I've got a lack of data, and 12 months down the track I've actually got somebody in post who's collecting the data, and we've got systems in place to collect the data right. I could not look you in the eye afterwards and go, well, sorry, Mike, I'm still waiting on that last little detail. I think what I would say to you is, I mean, it's if I put my business hat on for a second, it's like trying to make big business decisions without actually knowing what the market you're trying to open up into is. You know, why would you do it? Why would you do that? Why would you put, you know, it's enough risk there. And the same is true for government. The risk of the wrong policy going forward, just because you thought, oh, I think it looks like that, and maybe it looks like that, and it's all anecdotal, and you know, and lots of people have got, you know, anecdotal bits about this, but actually when push comes to shove, there's a famous book, isn't there, called, is it the Black Swan events, or you haven't heard this one, and it's literally about how people make their minds up on one extraordinary event, and then they carry on. So someone, I've given a business example, Google, for instance, becoming successful. Lots of people tried to set up search engines way back in the day. Only one of them came away. Millions, I say millions, hundreds of thousands of people lost their shirt and lost millions of pounds, thinking that, oh, Google are making lots of money, God, it's what an easy way to do this. And I think, again, if they didn't do the data, they didn't do the proper research, and they didn't understand the level of risk they were taking. And I think that's why you need the data. It's about managing the risk element.
That's why I wish there was more analysis, like we discussed it with your meeting. First-time buyers. First of all, what is a first-time buyer?
Yeah.
But how many people are there actually are, and obviously it's changed now the last couple of weeks with all the fiasco going on with mortgages, but how many people genuinely are in the market as first-time buyers? Because houses are so unaffordable.
Yeah.
They create a queue, and they'll forever be in the queue because their wages will never be sufficient to buy a house. They get in the queue, and it's become a sort of an emotional thing. And it's the perpetuation of a queue is part of the argument. Oh, there's a queue. If you release people without quals, there'll be a bigger queue. Not inevitably. The ones without quals have got money in their hand. They'll put money into the system. Maybe they will create more houses than there are. You see, they can create.
And I get that argument, and that was my argument around this concept of the park bench to home ownership in that arc. You know, and that is what are the steps that you need to take, you know, in terms of wraparound services, whether it be getting someone who's alcohol dependent, off alcohol, into a more stable area, but then you come into, okay, so you're able to live by yourself, or you want to move on by yourself. What's the next point? Is it you go into rental? You know, is a rental step the next step? And then men, you know, or you get, I don't know, assistance with your rental. I'm talking to you here, a bit of blue sky thinking, but for me, it's that stepping stones along the way. And so when you talk about first-time buyer, it's almost as if someone's just walked off the street and said, well, I'm a first-time buyer, you know, I'm coming into buy. You know, I sense it's we need to think of it more in a progressive way, you know, in a step-by-step way to
It was a bit ironic today because I wished she was on your scrutiny panel because they had what's her name, Kovats.
Kovats.
And of course, there's a Romanian there.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And she's come up. She's now in the government. You see, there's a sort of a mental thinking process needs to go on. The people who are opposed to releasing housing for so-called immigrants. You know, she's not the only immigrant in the government.
Well, think of Rishi Sunak. You know, he's just come on and is now Prime Minister in the UK. And I think this is the great beauty of the British, I don't know if you can call it democratic, or the British nation, is that we are an amalgam of, I mean, is there such a thing as a Brit, you know what, there is such a thing obviously as a British person, but you know, if you went down into the essence of it is you know, who is more British kind of thing. And I think we sometimes get a bit, this is where we get hung up on all the, you know, I've got a book at home called 1,000 Years of Immigration. The first title though is called Bloody Foreigners, you know, and it's quite an irony, but about that history. And I think Britain has benefited massively from immigration, because we've had our pool of people refreshed by some of the best brains around the world, whether they've just had a suitcase when they've started off, or whether they're a multimillionaire. We don't seem to recognise it, or seem to be able to recognise it. We don't feel relaxed about it, because all we think is they're taking something away from us, and it's not the case. They're enhancing our society.
They got as you will be aware, they got a policy now of negotiating with Antigua and Barbuda for bringing people specifically from those places for the tourism industry. And I was sitting there thinking, well, we've had all this before with the famous boat they brought in a load of Jamaicans back in the 1950s.
Yes.
And then, of course, they can only stay for a season, these guys. Women and guys.
Yes.
But they're thinking now about extending it to 18 months after they're trying to negotiate. Well, that has implications, so vast implications. They got to renegotiate the work permit scheme and all that. And obviously they can't just change it for that specific small group. That you'll have other people in the same category. I mean, because obviously they've tried to limit it, and part of the problem is the UK legislation, which they've got to overcome.
Absolutely.
It's not all local legislation.
No. I mean, Brexit has had this incredible overlaying impact on it.
Absolutely.
And of course, one of the issues, which I'm not sure lots of people are very aware of, is, but Jersey is very much on the borderline of the immigrant workforce coming into the UK market. So the free, what I call the free, is it free travel area or free trade area? Common travel area. And I think there's a bit of paranoia from the UK government, is Jersey, what if Jersey became the weak link? Suddenly all the boat people just came into Jersey and then made their way into...
Of course, it's 3 islands, it's not just the one, so they've got to find a system which is compatible for the 3 dependent territories.
But the point being, bigger point being, is that there's this fear factor that suddenly all these thousands of people are going to... And it's in the reality on the ground is that's not the case, and that's not what's going on at the moment. And I think because we are our own government body, so in some ways what we have to do in Jersey, it's difficult to say this, we've got to operate a little bit below the radar on some of this stuff, and get on and prove that we can have these laws which to some degree satisfy the demands of the UK government, but also at the same time recognise we have very, very strong economic needs.
Well, the UK government isn't in the market of trying to create problems for little territories like Jersey and Guernsey. They don't want to. They want them to carry on and not bother them too much. But there are implications. There's only 100 and something odd thousand people here. It's not a huge population here. So if you have a fresh intake of 1,000, 2,000 immigrant workers, it's not a great problem. But of course it lands on your desk.
Absolutely.
Because you've got to house them somewhere. And somewhere that's going to be respectable and going to be affordable. And they're not going to get exploited. You've got to deal with all that.
This is the interesting thing. I keep being reminded by my right hand in Natasha, who was sat next to me, who was an ex-planning, I say ex-planning person, a planner. And about quality, one of the things planning has spent an awful lot of time is about quality of build, minimum space sizes, minimum room size and things like that. And one of the things she always reminds me is we've got to be careful what we wish for. If we're going to try and bring prices down and things like that, that has a consequence. That has a consequence on the space in which people can live in. And so the question is would you or I be happy to live in a space that's half the size, we maybe currently use for a kitchen, and all this kind of thing. So the whole planning, the reason Jersey has the standard of accommodation and living that we have at the moment is over year after year after year of simply quietly trying to improve things. And this is where it becomes a challenge when things get unaffordable, and you then start to try and make compromises in areas maybe you would not normally make compromises.
I hope the public are getting the message that you've got a Romanian deputy. I hope she's presumably...
I hope so, yes. She's trying to bring remove GST off food at the moment, isn't she?
She is.
To the Assembly.
And I hope they realise that is the sort of quality of person you've got, because they're all about people with special skills. Now, she's in the government. I totally get it. The brain has to think it through, doesn't it?
I mean, we have Portuguese representatives, haven't we, within the Assembly now?
Well,
and that's the first...
Born here, though.
Sorry?
She was born here.
Born here, oh right, okay. Whereas Kovacs has come to the island and immigrated to
here.
That's
right.
Yeah.
And we did have a Frenchman, but he's not survived.
And of course we have our first black female Beatrice Poirier,
Indeed.
you know, who's now in the States Assembly.
Absolutely.
I think it's actually quite. Doesn't that make you kind of give you hope in our society that we have an assembly that is this diverse? I feel like Rob Ward here, so I'll throw a question back at you. But do you feel encouraged by that? Do you think
I am encouraged.
It gives us a wider perspective on life?
You see, this is the trouble. That whatever they are, wherever they come from, politically, of course, I'm rather far left.
Yes, yeah.
And they're not far left.
No.
So and I'm surprised they're not more far left. Maybe they're.
Fair comment.
You know, maybe they're hiding the politics, but they're not. They present what they genuinely are. You know, like I said on the interview about you, I think you are genuinely what you are.
Yes.
Now you're an arch capitalist.
Yes. But I have a socialist heart.
Exactly. And this is one of the ironies.
All bad, Mike.
This is one of the ironies in this whole system, because if you have to help people pay rents for them, give them money handouts, like they're talking about giving farmers a very big pay to farmers. Well, it smacks of socialism to me.
Yeah.
That's not the way arch-capitalist governments work.
No. And I think it's probably that awareness that if you want to be economically sustainable, you have to give a bit, kind of thing, in areas. I mean, it's another aspect is of globalization, and this idea that food. You never used to be able to have food. You know, when did we start eating strawberries in December? You know, stuff all used to be seasonal. We used to tolerate it all. Now, oh my God, the blueberries have run out in Waitrose. You know, there's a life-threatening event. You know, but we've become so accustomed to all of this 24/7. Growing anywhere in the world and all the rest of it. And what you realise is that our little old Jersey here, we're trying to compete in a market that's a global market against people who've got, who are picking big potatoes on fields that are out, as bigger than the island of Jersey, with all the inherent savings that has. So the question, obviously, it becomes is it a moral question or I'm not sure it's an even economic question. It's a question of do we want to grow our own food still? Do we want to make
that was very much an issue today because they're going to put so much money into agriculture, and I couldn't see for the life of me why they were bothering. Because it's a failing industry. They were saying they don't even know who's going to take over the farms because succession is a problem. But even growing stuff. But really, I know the reason why, because they want the pretty background. That's all it is.
I get that. I mean, that's quite a cynical approach. I'd like to think it's a bit about food security, and you may say, oh, maybe it's not. But I think the fact is that the Russians invaded Ukraine, and I think that has actually coloured an awful lot of thought process in all of this. We suddenly don't feel quite as secure as we once were, and one of the challenges is how do we make ourselves more secure going forward, and economically secure.
You're the housing minister. Are you going to give every house that gets built whilst you're there, you don't make the decision?
No.
Will they have a piece of land to grow their food on?
Right, that's good question, and it obviously is not the case at the moment.
I read it on Facebook all the time. People say, "Oh, we must grow our own. We can grow window boxes. We can plant." Well, so what? That's just decoration. That's all.
Tip of the iceberg, yes, of the grand scheme of things. Inherently is the principle right. I think the principle is a good one. It gets people active out into the fresh air and all the rest of it. So there are some social benefits to that. If you don't believe in the economic benefit of it, but there are other positive aspects of it.
As a result of your scrutiny, obviously they'll do a report and they'll find fault with you and they'll praise you for some things. When you came away from it, what did you think? Did you think that's something I really must get to grips with?
It's something I don't know if I processed.
Apart from the non-quals, of course.
I mean, in terms of processing it, I think what's useful from scrutiny is it makes you look at stuff maybe from a slightly different angle, and you realise that other people have different perspectives on it. I think when you're developing policy, you have a team around you. There's plenty of people out there with giving us input into as far as the government's concerned. But what's good is someone from outside saying, what we think makes eminent sense. To say, well, actually, does it really make sense? Or actually, I think the emphasis should be a little bit more this way than that way. I think it's always good that it refresh. As I keep saying about this idea of refreshing the pool, it just, I've copied in your interview to yesterday's interview to my team because I said I think Rob made some valid points, and I think it's good that we take some of those points on board. So whether it came out of the scrutiny meeting as such or whether it came out of commentary afterwards, I don't mind. But I am always interested in someone having a different perspective on ours and why that is. And is that really valid? And not to just simply poo-poo it and go, oh, that was a load of rubbish. I think life's a lot more complicated than that.
I mean, I made the point with Rob about the fact that it's Andium really are the government department.
Yeah.
They make all the decisions.
Well, he was talking about arm's length becoming more and more arm's length.
Yeah. I mean, I've got my feelings about arm's length.
Yeah.
I mean, some have failed in the UK, they've wound them up.
Yeah.
Some are still going for quite a long time. It's one of those ideas, but the result is your department has got nobody there. You haven't got a department.
Well,
you've got two people.
I know, and what I would just say to you is that that has been a failing, I think, before for someone like Andium would set the strategy.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be someone within government who'd be saying, it'd be Andy who'd telling you, oh, by the way, this is the strategy we're using. And I think we're increasingly aware that that's not good. That's not very good tactically. So we take on board all the strategy which Andy have. We then have to overlay that with what we would like as a government to be doing, and then hopefully between the two of us.
That's another aspect of it, because it's not just the two of us. There are other housing providers out there,
and absolutely,
and they're not being drawn in.
And I agree, and I think that is a problem, and I do genuinely think that's a problem. I think some of the housing trusts could be used much more extensively. I still don't, and here's another honest point. I would say I don't quite understand how it is that they can be more involved. What the message they keep sending to me is, we have the resources, we will build, give us the land and we will build, kind of thing.
Right.
So the question then is that a Jersey Property Holdings issue? Is there land out there that the government isn't currently using that could be appropriate for housing that we don't know? I'm constantly, and this is on a week by week basis, finding out more and more things, and I think it's everybody goes, well, your data, there's a history, there's 30 years of housing reports out there, but they in principle all say the same thing. And the problem is everybody has a little bit of information of what they tried, but sadly that little bit of information of what they tried, I struggle to find, find that out. And so I've made it a bit of a mission on my own, and I think I brought a couple of books along with me to the scrutiny hearing, talking about homelessness and stuff like, to really understand the topic in a far broader sense. Because I think you can get too stuck around the idea of we need 3,000 more homes or 2,000 more homes, and rather actually what I really want to understand is the fundamental issue. What is the psychology behind not having a home or roof over your head? That's fundamental, and how does that impact on people's lives in a wider form? And I think that sounds really, soft, woolly stuff, but it really, if you can think in those terms, I think you will have far better insight into what the decisions that need to be taken.
I did suggest in the interview that I did with Rob Warr about you've got this £10 million burning a hole in your pocket.
Yeah. The most difficult £10 million I've ever had to spend.
Well, there you are. It's like the £1 million note, or whatever it was, the film, wasn't it? You couldn't spend it. You had to spend it for the end of the day. An architectural competition amongst designers, and not just local ones, generally, a decent to design housing which is suitable for Jersey, which isn't going to cost the earth. So obviously the first point is you've got to have land to put it on or someone to put it on. That's the common thread, that's the internal. But the actual design of them, I mean, some of the timber boxes they're showing are pretty hideous. And they won't fit in. If you try to put them, they just will be totally irrelevant to the street scene. And they'll be pretty irrelevant to most of the countryside scene as well. I know you can't carry on building granite farmhouses forever and ever and ever. But if you look, I was looking the other day, the nostalgia, as I said, if you look at the street scenes of 1890, the photographs that are appearing, nostalgia, they are superb. The way the architecture is done, a lot of fiddly detail.
Well, you look down some of the roads. I mean, if you go to People's Park and you go down, there's a road that goes directly down there as if you were turning left up to Old St John's Road, and all the rest of it on your right-hand side. There are a whole series of wonderful buildings which are all from Victorian era. And as you said, I've often looked at some of those buildings. People have made so much effort to become more than just simply a utilitarian building. They've actually thought about how is this going to impact on the seats, the scene around St Helier. We need more of that. I absolutely agree with you, and I really, really do want more imagination. And certainly that would be something I I like AJA, the Association of Jersey Architects.
Right.
I go to their meetings.
They don't invite me anymore.
Don't they?
Well,
See, I'm interested. I mean, maybe because you've criticised some of the designs, I don't know, it could be. But what I'm just saying is, I feel like, again, this is about money, isn't it, sometimes? There's this sense of, well, it's too expensive to build that much level of sophistication. I want to go a bit more deep.
Because it's not just the visual anymore. There is a climate change problem. And these houses have got to be self-sufficient. They've got to be producing their own heat. You can't heat houses anymore. That's yesterday's news. These have got to produce it from you're breathing out hot air, and that's got to heat your house. I mean, this is how simple it is.
There's a lot of stuff that is going on in that space at the moment. But I think one of the concerns I have, I think, is trying to contextualize some of that stuff into Jersey. So to give it the Jersey character,
absolutely,
because there is a bit of anywhere, you could be anywhere, anywhere, and of course you've heard of Clone Town, Britain, which is every high street looks the same.
Exactly.
So I think again.
Well, of course you have the multiple shops, and they want to look the same because they want. There's one there staring me in the face.
I know, and then obviously you go over to London or you go to wherever, and they want you to recognise that brand and all the rest.
Exactly.
And I get that, but that's where you need a strength of character in terms of our own local, look, and the Jersey look, and have the belief in it as well. Right. And I think that's some of the bit. I think sometimes Jersey needs to get its I'm going to say a horrible word here, but get its balls back. Get its mojo back. That's the better word. Sorry, you'll cut that previous bit.
Mojo.
But mojo back, and I do think that sometimes we need that courage to do that. And I think we've got the brains, we've got the intelligence, we've got bright people who really care about this, in every aspect of life. And I think we should be absolutely encouraged to be different.
And I wish your department. You haven't got a department. This is the tragedy.
Well, I have. It's getting bigger.
The name under the minister, and yours.
Sure.
We should have more impact on the actual product, the design, the house, the home. I wish you could have more, but you don't really get invited to have impact.
We're relying on architects to do that. Having said that, we can make commentary. And obviously, there are lots of different areas. I won't elucidate further on that, but I am very, very keen on some of the new upcoming projects which we think will be going ahead. I really want some imagination used. I really do, and I will be pushing for that. Now, whether I get my way on that at all, but I will certainly fight tooth and nail to make things different.
I'm just waving at your chief minister.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine.
She's probably gate crash on your interview.
She's coming to different entrance.
She's had Well, I thank you for your time. As always,
my pleasure.
I always invite you. Last thought, anything
else?
Anything you've learned this week and you're just raring to go.
I just feel this is I just say to you, Mike, this is a journey. I mean, I think what's slightly scary is it's only been a 5-month journey so far, and I think it's the thing which a lot of people go is, the housing minister, he should have all the solutions. Why doesn't he have all the solutions right now? And it's that research. The reassurance I get is that there are some very, very good people who I'm surrounded by. I have the privilege, and I genuinely say this, have a privilege to work with, who have Jersey really on their mind when they're trying to make big decisions and big calls. But I, as you can see, I'm just a great believer in listening, hearing to it. It sounds really cynical. I don't mean this to be cynical, but I just take on board all the different views and try and disseminate it in some way. Try and some way use it, and then come out with something new and fresh and so forth. Be original, and encourage those around me to be more original. And again, it's leadership, isn't it? In the end, it's trying to.
I wasn't going to say anymore, but there's something very strange going on, because listening to you in the scrutiny and listening to today in the scrutiny, you've got the minister, but you're both saying you're getting further away from being able to do anything because it's somebody else's department or they do that, And I'm wondering, why does that come about?
I don't think we're getting further away. I think this is you criticise the size of the housing department, of 2 or 3 people or whatever, but actually I think that's that's the beauty of what I'm doing at the moment, is we're very, very nimble. And that, some people go, oh, you're too nimble, in that respect.
Well, that's how businesses are run.
But that's how businesses are run. And I think that's what I like and enjoy about it. That's why I'm seriously interested about that, because it does make you think an awful lot about these areas and what can come to. Don't forget, the decisions we make today in 30 years' time may come round to haunt us. Or in 30 years' time, we may turn around and go, jeepers, we started something great there. And I hope it's the latter, and that's what I want it to be.
We will cease.
We've probably had our 30 minutes, have we? Our hour.
Cheers.
No problem at all. My pleasure as always.